Today, we're going to slow down time a bit and strip away our modern illusions of permanence. I mean, we live in a world where literally everything feels completely under our command, right? You turn a handle, water just appears. You ask a smart speaker, and boom, the temperature shifts. It's kind of funny when you really think about it. We can have a smart home that answers our every vocal whim, yet it absolutely cannot conjure a single drop of real water from thin air. We've built this entire massive civilization on the foundational assumption that the basic elements of survival are just always going to be waiting on standby. But what actually happens when we pull on that thread? Well, today, we are exploring the profound fragility of human survival by looking at our foundational dependence on flowing water.
I want you to take a second to absorb this single, profoundly evocative sentence and let the sheer gravity of this ancient thought experiment really settle over you. Say, consider this. If your water were to sink into the earth, then who else could bring you flowing water? That's from Quran 67:30. In just a handful of words, this text completely bypasses all of our technological arrogance and strikes right at the very core of our existence. You know, it's not just poetry, it is a razor-sharp philosophical inquiry. And over the course of this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this ancient quote forces us to confront a pretty uncomfortable yet totally undeniable reality about our actual place in the natural order.
Section 1. The Ultimate Question, an Ancient Thought Experiment.
We're going to deconstruct this text, starting with the very first beat of the narrative. So, the crucial point here is that this isn't just some passive statement. It starts with a direct prompt. Say, consider this. It's literally asking you, the viewer, to mentally pause and engage. It doesn't just tell you what to think right out of the gate. Actually, scratch that. It's more than a prompt. It demands your active participation. You're being asked to step out of the autopilot of your daily routine and actually deploy your imagination to evaluate a hypothetical scenario, to truly consider it with all the intellectual honesty you can muster.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the source text demands we drop our everyday assumptions to face a really stark existential reality. First, it forces a deliberate pause for reflection, which, let's be honest, is something we rarely do in our incredibly fast-paced lives. Then, it completely strips away our illusions of modern control. Sure, our reservoirs and pipelines make us feel like absolute masters of our domain, but this thought experiment primes us to realize those are merely delivery systems, not the actual source. Ultimately, it sets the stage for a high-stakes hypothetical scenario where the stakes are quite literally life and death.
Moving on to Section 2. The thought experiment. The vanishing.
Now, what's really terrifying about this is the specific hypothetical scenario we're asked to visualize. It logically progresses from the comforting presence of water to a sudden, catastrophic vanishing. We start with our baseline. The water is present and accessible. That's our right now. But then comes the catastrophic shift. It sinks entirely into the earth. It isn't destroyed, mind you. It's just swallowed by the ground, dropping way down beyond the reach of our deepest wells and our absolute most advanced pumps, which leaves us with the final reality, the realization of a complete and absolute absence. Imagine the pure shock of reaching for something that has literally always been there, only to find nothing but dry dirt.
Notice the explicit sensory contrast we're asked to visualize here. Think about the phrase, water sinking into the earth. It feels heavy, hidden. It's a permanent loss pulled down by gravity into dark, totally inaccessible depths. Now, compare that to flowing water. Flowing implies movement, energy, accessibility. It's dynamic, it's life-giving. It actively comes to us. The thought experiment doesn't just ask what happens if we lose water generally. It specifically highlights the loss of accessible, flowing water that interacts with our world and actually sustains our ecosystems.
Section 3. The limits of human control. Facing the void.
This brings us directly to the climax of the source text, where we are forced to confront the absolute limits of our own power. Then who else could bring you flowing water? Just listen to the profound silence that follows that question. It is deliberately designed to expose our ultimate inability to control nature. The sentence just hangs there in the air, challenging every single bit of human pride. When the fundamental resource vanishes, who do you call? What piece of technology do you deploy? The devastating answer is no one and nothing.
The text forces us to acknowledge that despite all of our human advancements, we absolutely cannot magically conjure this fundamental resource once it vanishes into the earth. We are forced to confront a complete resource absence. We're not talking about a temporary drought, we're talking about a total disappearance. It highlights our sheer inability to recreate the source. We can filter water, sure, we can move it, we can bottle it, but we absolutely cannot create it from nothing if the earth just swallows it up. Ultimately, it questions ultimate authority. forcing us to ask who or what is actually providing it in the first place. It shifts our perspective from masters of our domain to incredibly fragile dependents.
Okay, Section 4. Our flowing dependence. The fragility of human survival. Let's really dive into the core focus of this entire explainer, our absolute reliance on this specific flowing resource. In the context of this ancient quote, flowing water isn't just a chemical compound. It represents the ultimate, extremely fragile tether keeping human survival afloat. It is literally the sole mechanism of our survival that we cannot magically recreate once it vanishes. I mean, think about it. We can synthesize certain materials, we can engineer alternatives for a lot of things, but flowing, accessible, life-sustaining water, that is a foundational prerequisite for life that we simply inherit. We do not invent it. So the crucial point to take away from all of this is a deeply philosophical realization of our own absolute fragility. We are entirely dependent on something we do not control. And that is a highly uncomfortable truth for modern humanity. We spend our entire lives building systems to convince ourselves that we are completely secure, independent, and in charge of our destiny. But this single, ancient sentence completely dismantles that illusion. It exposes the reality that our grand civilizations and our towering modern cities are all built on a foundation that is actively provided to us day in and day out, entirely outside of our control.
I want to leave you staring at this screen, deeply contemplating your own absolute reliance on the flowing water you take for granted every single day. The thought experiment we started with isn't just an ancient riddle. It is an ongoing, present-tense reality check. It asks you to honestly evaluate the true nature of your existence. So I leave you with this final, provocative question. If the flowing water you rely on vanished today, what truly remains of your independence? Just think about that for a second the next time you turn on the tap.